Hi everyone, welcome to the visual guide for the Seat of Sacrifice. This is the newest trial made available by the MSQ in patch 5.3 in Final Fantasy XIV Reflections in Crystal. Without a light to guide you, this encounter can push you to your limit, but there's no need to sacrifice your sanity by fighting with Party Finder to the bitter end. My name is Mistec and I'll be your trial guide. Terror Unleashed will bring all player health pools down to 1 and afflict everyone with a true Walking Dead debuff. To avoid death, all players must be healed to full before the countdown ends. Make sure you're in range of your healers to help them out. You'll also notice the outer edges of the platform will be covered by danger zones. Stay out of these as necessary. Solum Confiteor will mark the ground under players with these AoE circles. Move away as necessary. Coruscant Saber will either be a donut or point blank AoE attack. Look for the telegraph and get ready to move in or out of melee range appropriately. Next up, the boss will cast Absolute Fire 3 and all players will have these very obvious pause button markers above their heads. This attack will apply the pyretic debuff on all players, dealing damage to them for any action or movement. To avoid excess damage, be sure to stop everything until your pyretic debuff falls off. Absolute Blizzard 3 is essentially the opposite mechanic. Players will instead have these obvious play button markers above their heads, indicating that they will need to move around constantly to avoid getting encased in a block of ice at the end of the cast. From this point on, the boss will cast imbued versions of Absolute Blizzard or Fire. This will cause his next Coruscant Sword attacks to also apply the Absolute Blizzard or Fire effects you just learned at the same time. You'll need to remember which element is imbued and prepare yourself. As an example, here's the point blank AoE with Absolute Blizzard 3 imbued. Players will move out of the AoE attack and continue to move to avoid getting trapped into an ice block. Sword of Light will cause a sword to form on the northern edge of the platform that will eventually begin to draw a pattern. All players will need to move out of the shape that is forming to avoid death. At the same time, you may notice a familiar dragon appear on one side of the north edge. Bahamut will dive bomb across that side of the platform and all players will need to get out of his way. The bitter end will deal heavy damage to the primary tank. Eld Dragon Dive will deal high raid-wide damage. Be sure to cool down shield and heal through both attacks. These mechanics will repeat until the boss reaches 50%, at which point he will begin to cast Ascendance. This will fetter all players and send them into an active time maneuver. You'll need to complete this active time maneuver even if your character dies before this phase transition, so make sure you're paying attention. All players must succeed spamming their buttons here or you will wipe. If you win, you'll move on to the next section of the encounter. At this point, the boss will cheat and cast LB4. You'll need to heavily shield, heal, and LB yourself to survive the blast. In this part of the fight, players will need to watch out for the same imbued element attacks along with some new mechanics. A number of meteor markers will appear around the platform in succession. Each marker requires 2 players to soak the meteor damage or it will explode, deal high damage, and debuff the raid. Once the marker is fully lit, you know you have enough players inside of it. Circles will form on the platform that will eventually spawn orbs that grow over time. Players will need to move away from these while also paying attention to what side Bahamut has spawned on. Move into the safe zone to avoid death. Absolute Holy will target one player with a stack-up marker and another player with the getaway flare marker. The flare marker will need to move away from the group while everyone else stacks up to share the holy damage. Eventually, the boss teleports to the center and casts to the limit. His LB bar will appear above his head. With LB1, 4 players will be marked with these orange markers and targeted for Radiant Braver. This will throw out large AoE lines in the direction of each marked player, so make sure to avoid overlap. Once this mechanic resolves, the boss will cast to the limit again, this time granting him 2 LB bars. Radiant Desperado will target the 2 healers with these lineup markers. The group will need to split into 2 to share damage with each healer. One final to the limit cast and the boss will gain 3 LB bars. 4 players will be targeted by massive radiant meteor circles. These deal very high damage, so make sure to avoid overlap. In this phase, Sword of Light will form 2 swords on the edges and players will have 2 patterns that they'll need to move out of. Eventually, players will need to watch for this knockback, move to the edge of the water spout, or use the knockback immunity to avoid getting punted into the outer edges. Anytime you see 4 Bahamuts tethered to random players, affected players can turn their adds away. Eventually, large frontal cones will spawn from each add in the direction of their tethered player, and having these point outward make it easier for the group to dodge. There are also many circle AoEs to avoid during this time, followed by an alternating room-wide AoE pattern from the center. Players will need to dance around to avoid these attacks as necessary. Don't forget about the Blizzard and Fire 3 casts overlapping with the attacks during this phase at the same time. All of these mechanics will repeat with overlap until the boss is down. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. Up next, we'll head into the new 24-man Alliance raid. As always, thanks for watching. Till next time.